partnerships here at Settle. I'm super excited for this conversation today. I am joined by Andi Ruda, founder of Rainbow CFO, who is going to be sharing a bunch of her wisdom and advice based on her many years of experience as both an in-house and fractional CFO. And the impetus for this webinar, Andi and I met up a couple months back here in Austin, and we were talking about some of the challenges that brands face when thinking about finance from a strategic perspective. And at Settle, we kind of put on our software tooling and working capital financing hats. Our platform really helps automate and optimize the procure to pay process, but tooling ultimately doesn't sit in a vacuum, and founders really need a team around them to ensure that they're making the right decisions when it comes to their finances. So, as Andi and I were discussing, there's so many questions when founders think about fractional support, how to find somebody who's the right fit for them, how they're supposed to work with that person to maximize the resource. How do they know when they're ready to have somebody in-house? And ultimately, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. But it's really important to understand, what are those inflection points to look out for, and how do you understand what's right for your business? So with all that said, super excited to have Andi come in and share some really practical advice on how to make these decisions. So with that, Andi, I will kick it over to you to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. So goal of today is really to keep it as practical as possible. I want to give you guys an overview of really what finance should be doing, what these roles and responsibilities are that you often hear, finance jargon, finance team names, etc. Talk about how to staff up your team from having no finance function at all the way to hiring and scaling a full-time team. Then we'll get into interview prompts, what to ask people, where to drill in, and how to maximize that relationship once you have your team on board. So to start, just quickly, a little bit about me. I'm Andi. I live in Austin, Texas, and I founded Rainbow CFO, which is a fractional CFO company. A fractional CFO is what it sounds like. I'm a part-time CFO to multiple companies that aren't yet ready for a full-time CFO. So earlier stage startups, able to bring my expertise as someone who has been a full-time CFO to companies that might not be ready for or have the budget for that full-time CFO quite yet. Before starting Rainbow CFO, I started my career at Accenture in their CFO consulting practice, where I worked with larger companies reporting into their CFOs and helping them with cost-cutting initiatives, modeling, anything really finance related in their org. From there, I took on my first full-time CFO role at Garagos & Garagos, which is a criminal defense law firm out of Los Angeles. And from there, I went to a jewelry company called Alex & Ani. They have e-com, retail, and wholesale distribution channels selling their famous bangle. I was there for a little bit under 3 years. And then I went to a VC-backed tech startup called Resonance. It's a fashion tech company, so I feel like straddled technology as well as my experience in jewelry and retail. All three of those roles were very different. Companies, very different types. We have services, we have product, and we have tech. At Alex & Ani, my team had 70 people on it. At Resonance, my team had 3 people on it, so very different size companies. But where I started to struggle in the depths of COVID, sitting in my small 1-bedroom apartment in New York, was what do I really love about my job and what do I hate about it? And where I was struggling was I just couldn't keep myself high level enough when I was full-time. I was getting pulled into the weeds of every little problem that came up, whether that be we need a new air conditioner in the warehouse and Andi needs to sign the PO. My time was unlimited to the company because I was full-time with them, and therefore I wasn't making the best use out of it. It was distracting. I couldn't see the trees. My job as CFO was to focus on growth and profitability, and a lot of times in a given week that would get pushed to the side to just be in the minutia with all the teams. And so I started to think, what if I made my time more limited to founders? Would they make better use of it? I also think that I struggled with the political game of being a full-time employee. It's hard to be as blunt with the CEO as you might need to be when you're worried about losing your one and only job. And you have blinders on. When I was at Alex & Ani, I thought about bangles 24/7 for 3 years. And so rather than getting to see how different companies were handling different finance issues, I just was very laser focused on one issue at all times. So I got, honestly, it all started when I got an inquiry on LinkedIn for a fractional CFO opportunity, which at the time I had zero time for, but it got me thinking, and I ultimately took the plunge and gave notice at my job in October of 2020, did a few months transition out, and then hit the ground running in January of 2021 with Rainbow CFO. And the good news is my hypothesis was correct. I am a way better fractional CFO than full-time CFO for really all the reasons I suspected. I'm able to be a lot more candid with the people I work with because I view it as an advisor relationship instead of an employment agreement. I learned so much working with different companies. I learn about what line of credit one client has and I bring it to the other. I get to work with their consulting firms, marketing agencies, my models. I can build so quickly now because I have templates. I've built them a million times. I know what works. I know what doesn't work. And really, I've just been able to learn a lot faster. So it's been awesome. And I have a lot of fun with it. Just really like, even for my own personal anxiety, it's like, it used to be all my eggs were in one basket. And I was like thinking about like the company. And if they had a bad day, my day was bad. And if they had a good day, my day was great. Whereas now there's always a client having a rougher day and there's always a client having a better day. And so I kind of just put my head down and do the work. So that's the impetus of Rainbow CFO. We work primarily with consumer goods companies. We also have SaaS and service businesses we work with, but I personally am partial to consumer goods. I think the business model is a lot more challenging. With software and services, you're really managing a workforce and people along with revenue. In consumer goods, you're managing inventory and managing your ad spend budgets and people and operating costs. There's just so much going into it. There's wholesale channels that look different than e-com, which look different than a retail store. Like there's just so much that I think my value add to a founder is much larger because the model is so complicated. It's very hard to manage for a CEO on their own. So that's me and that's Rainbow CFO. Moving on, I want to start high level first, and I won't spend too much time here, but I think a lot of people shy away from finance and say, I'm not a numbers person. I don't understand finance and it's too complicated for me. But especially in an early stage business, it's really quite simple in terms of the goals and what you're trying to accomplish. So first and foremost, report on performance, delivering the financial statements, helping leadership understand not only why there's the numbers on the page, but like what's underlying. So you missed revenue. Why? Well, customer acquisition costs were more expensive, or our customers are buying less each month when they come here. So the drivers beneath it, doing a forecast versus actuals to say, here's what we set out to do versus here's where we landed. Really just understanding what happened is like the first pillar of finance and what you need to do to really move on to the rest. So that's performance. This will be owned by accounting, but your CFO is obviously going to be laser focused on this. And with good actuals and an understanding of performance, you can then plan for the future in an accurate way. So this is where I spend most of my time, which is modeling and forward-looking finance. So how much cash do we need? How do we get to profitability? What is our revenue going to be like this year? So really building a plan alongside the leadership team and the CEO to say, here are your goals and here's how you can get it there tactically. You might tell me you want to get to $100 million in 3 years. I'll show you what you would need to do that. And that might be realistic or it might not. So I also think finance's job is to really like bring the rest of the team down to earth, hold them accountable, and also say like, here's what's more realistic. Hey, let's scenario plan. What if things don't go as planned? Like, what does that all look like for you? And then probably like the least sexy part of finance, supporting operations, but needs to get done. So paying your vendors, making sure your customers are paying you, running payroll, sales tax, income tax, capital needs. If you need debt to sustain a seasonal business, if you need equity to really grow your business at a time where you're not profitable, all of this falls in the wheelhouse of finance. So at its core, big company, small company, these are the goals that you're really trying to accomplish. So with that, when do you introduce a finance team? Any company that starts probably starts with a founder who is managing the books, paying the vendors alongside all of their other jobs. And so I get asked often of when do you bring in finance support beyond that, that CEO or founder who's kind of running it alongside their many hats. And so first and foremost, I think there's no formula time-wise. It's more about when these milestones start to happen at your company. So first, I'll talk about lack of finance experience in the existing leadership team. It's great that you've been able to manage your books to this point, but if you've never had a finance, accounting, or numbers-oriented role before this, you might need help earlier on than someone who does. making sure you're setting up your books the right way, making sure you're putting process in place that's scalable, modeling and focusing on the future so you really know what you're working with. All of this is a time where you really need to bring someone in to help you. And honestly, sometimes it'll pay for itself. If you bring in an accounting firm who can put a bill.com in place and get you some good support systems, like, you're going to be spending a lot less time and you'll have that to dedicate to the rest of your business to hopefully help it flourish. So that's number one. Number two sounds pretty obvious, but as your revenues are growing, so are your teams most likely. So is your CEO's list of responsibilities. And so as you start to grow revenue wise, it also will be a time where bringing someone in will help. Also, as your team is growing with revenue, they need to be held accountable. So you need someone who can not only spend time with the CEO, but someone who can spend time with the teams and educating them about their budgets, understanding from them what's happening, and all porting it back to the model so that it represents an accurate view of the future. Sounds similar, but expanding business complexity doesn't always equate to growing revenue. So there's other things that can get more complex. Maybe you're starting to work with many more suppliers. Maybe you are starting to expand into different channels, different product types. All of this, where really like cash management and like managing your financials and plans might also be a trigger for you to bring in outside finance support. Again, whether that is outsourced or full-time. And then finally, if you've completed a fundraise, this might be prompted by you or by your new investor. I get calls all the time from investors who say they just brought on a new portfolio company and they really need someone there who can help translate the numbers, make sure they're sticking to the plans that they promised in that fundraise and in those plans, and really just make sure that the company is being fiscally responsible with this large amount of capital that's come in. So I'll say this too, just because you completed a fundraise, it does not mean you need to go out and hire a ton of finance resources. I would still always advise, like, be judicious. We'll talk about this later, but like, don't rush to like overstaff your finance team. You don't need a seasoned full-time CFO day one necessarily. You can be smart about how you phase it in. At the end of the day, finance is still a back office function. So I would always push towards spending your dollars on revenue generating, getting your product in the hands of more customers as quickly as possible first. But like I said, there are triggers, and your dollars will go a long way in terms of supporting the longevity of your business. So again, this one's more of like a high level overview, but there's a lot of roles within the finance org that you probably hear thrown around a lot. So just wanted to quickly talk about what the goals and objectives are for each of these people as you're hearing these roles. So first is the CFO or head of finance. This is me. In a full-time capacity, this person is really owning everything. So they might have people under them managing the details, but they are owning the business model. They are like signing off on the financial statements and marking them as closed. They're joining meetings across the team, the company, to make sure finance is up to date on new customers coming in, pricing changes, any strategic decisions that might be happening. That person should be there and really have an active voice in pushing back on the company when they're making these decisions. Setting budgets, managing the bank accounts. If there's a line of credit, knowing when to draw on that, making sure customers are paying by reviewing the aging, and being the person to sign off on any cash leaving the business. So this is the CFO. In a fractional basis, the fractional CFO might be more focused on that business model, managing cash, and less on a lot of the other like minutia, but at its core, the CFO is still really the person in charge. Next is the controller. At an early stage business, you're probably not going to see this role, but you will hear about it. The controller is someone who will probably join later on in a business as accounting becomes more complex, and as a CFO has less time to offer to that accounting team to really be in the weeds on process and the books. They're the liaison. They're typically going to have more of an accounting background than a FP&A, which means financial planning and analysis background. But they're going to be setting up process to manage cash. They are going to be staying up to date on accounting rules and regulations as those change. They're going to manage the accounting team, and they're probably going to be the ones signing off on close and presenting those financials to the CFO. So again, later stage, an outsourced accounting firm might have like a fractional controller that comes along with it, but a full-time, I would say full-time, you're going to hire a head of finance, an accountant or bookkeeper before you hire a controller. Next is the bookkeeper and accountant. Like it sounds, they're the person who is actually going into all of your transactions every month and putting them into the financial statements. in an outsourced firm, they might also be handling your AP and accounts receivable. Anything very tactical, and I'd say like something that's processing in the background is something your bookkeeper will own. And then finally, a financial analyst. This is someone who, as your company grows, might support the CFO in terms of like financial planning. They're going to sit with departments to really understand what's going on there and help them with ad hoc analyses. So let's say your product team is considering a new product or a few different vendors for manufacturing. They'll help with margin analyses and really help the department structure their decision making in a financial way. Like a controller, I think this is a role that comes a bit later. For a while, the CFO is probably going to own the model in a lot of those department conversations. I know in really all of the cases of clients I'm working with, really anywhere from like 0 to 60 million, like I'm still owning that model. Not always the case, but this is a later role. And this list isn't exhaustive. There are accounts payable specialists, accounts receivable specialists. Like as companies grow, they start to beef up their team, but I think these are the terms you're probably going to hear at anything under like $100 million company. So here is the timeline of like when to bring on all of these people we've talked about. And there's no like set number of months or weeks or years that this happens, but there are triggers and there is an order that I like to follow. So we already talked about finance being owned by the CEO or founder. This can go on as long as is comfortable, and based on the milestones we talked about in the earlier slide, they might tag out at a certain point. First and foremost, I always say find a bookkeeper. I get inquiries all the time saying, hey, we're ready for our first finance support. Like, can you help us? And I will say, yes, but we need clean financials before I can help you. And so I'll often say, we need to find you a bookkeeper or an accounting firm to get clean financials before you're really going to get much out of working with me. For me to provide analyses, thoughtful advice, to plan and use a business model, I need good financial statements. It's like garbage in, garbage out. Like we need to get these cleaned up. And so I say first and foremost, get a good bookkeeper. Like we talked about earlier, you're going to want to have accrual-based financials for your CEO or CFO to really plan with. And really, like when you're going from no finance support to any finance support, it's going to be a lot to ingest and it's going to be a lot to integrate. So even going from just you to working with an accounting firm is now going to have more meetings. There's going to be more reports to review. There's going to be another person to think about. So rushing to bring on too many people, even though in theory it sounds like it'll just up and up and up you, like it won't work if you're not slowly building your process around them. So I always encourage everyone to take baby steps and make sure your financials are clean before you start really working with an expert on planning your financials going forward. But then if and when you're ready and you really have, I'd say like financials to work with, and you're looking at planning your future, understanding your cash runway, getting into unit economics, margins, et cetera, like that's the time to bring in a fractional CFO. And biased, but I actually think a fractional CFO can stay with you for quite a long haul. I know I've been working with some of my clients since day one, 3.5 years ago. And when I first started, expected those relationships to be more project-based and I don't know, like maybe hand that off to someone more full-time sooner, but a fractional CFO, if they build the model the right way, can really manage your business for quite some time. And I think as companies are more comfortable with remote relationships after COVID, this definitely, the tenure of a fractional CFO has expanded. So this person will come in, they will own your model, they will oversee that bookkeeper and their financials, and they'll be that liaison between you and your strategic vision and how accounting is even booking numbers. So making sure the right chart of accounts are there so you can analyze numbers correctly and forecast them out properly. If you are forecasting certain expenses based on what happened in the month prior, they better be correct and they better be stored in the right place. Otherwise, your plans might be incorrect. So that's a fractional CFO. Your first full-time hire will probably come as a function of your fractional CFO saying, hey, I am dropping balls right now. Like we need someone a bit more in the weeds. Or let's say you are in need of someone to join a lot more meetings with you. If you fall into that bucket of not having deep financial expertise yourself, maybe you want that finance partner who can really join you like day in, day out and be thinking about your business all the time because you can't think about it financially as much. This is an inflection point where I've often like helped a client find a full-time resource. It does not always have to be a CFO to start. And in fact, I'd caution you against that. I would say, find someone who fits the needs of your business. It might be a finance manager. I think that's where I usually tend to start, as someone who has done it before, has worked more tactically in their prior roles, so knows the mechanics, and will still feel comfortable being a bit more tactical. Your first full-time finance hire is going to wear all the hats. They're going to own the business model. They're going to oversee accounting. They're probably going to be overseeing AP, AR. There's just a lot. And so I think finding someone where it's a bit of a stretch role and they're excited and gung-ho about stepping into this and doing their best job, while potentially still being coached by that fractional CFO. I like to start there, but again, it'll depend on the needs of your company and where like that pressure point is of where, like, let's say balls are being dropped. And then from there, you'll grow your finance function, and different companies will bring on a next role and a next role from there. We'll talk about this in a few slides, but that's really the order I see. It's like bookkeeper before anything else. Get your clean financials. You can't plan for the future if you don't know what happened. And so I think this is the order that I like to adhere to. So finding the right fit. So whether it's an accounting firm, fractional CFO, these are the questions that I would ask myself if I were in your shoes. So first is, do you want to have one firm own everything, or do you want to have different resources for each? So are you going to hire an accounting firm that brings along a bookkeeper, a fractional CFO, and potentially a tax preparer all in one package? This is easy. You manage one vendor. They're delivering everything. You know they're talking to one another because they're all on the same side of the fence. Or are you going to hire different resources for each? Again, biased. But this is typically the relationship I'm working in, since I don't have an accounting team at Rainbow CFO. But the benefit here is the healthy tension between those two groups. So I am relentlessly auditing the accounting team's financials for all of my client. If they are missing deadlines, I am on them. I am calling out issues. I am raising them to the CEO, because ultimately, like, we are different vendors and I need their work to be great for my work to be great. And so I like the healthy tension, but different combinations work for different people. And there's again, pros and cons of both. Next is, should you hire an agency or an individual freelancer? So if you hire an accounting firm, you're getting access to multiple resources. If your resource goes on vacation, you have someone backfilling. If there's an issue, there is a partner assigned to your account. There are multiple resources. Sometimes there's experts in technology implementation if you're bringing in a new tool. So pros of an agency is definitely just like access to more resources, versus an individual freelancer or like a smaller, tiny firm like me. You're not getting access to all of those resources, but you are getting the person you sign up for. So you are talking to that person, you like that resource, and that is who you are getting. I also know that this isn't just a job for me. It is like my personal brand. And so if my client has an issue, I am up with them late at night. I am working on the weekends, and like my only form of marketing is doing a good job. So for me, I know I like always take the extra step to really like integrate myself fully in the team. And I think that's like the individual freelancer approach, where it's like, hey, this is my brand and I'm all in. So again, pros and cons of both. Third, I would ask myself, is product specific knowledge critical to success in this role? So CP, like I would say, you definitely need to find a resource who is familiar with products if that's what you're working in. But in some cases, like, products can look very similar across my clients, at least. Like, I don't always feel the need to have like the most in-depth knowledge about this specific type of product, but there are exceptions to that. Like if you have a food product and you need someone who understands the co-packing process or how long shelf stable products last, and there's nuance to what you're doing that's important, like you need to identify that up front. And I would say, think about it before you start the process. Ultimately, once you start talking to resources, although I know I'll always flag, like if I don't think I'm the right fit for someone, again, that would be my bad marketing. If I do a bad job, it's not a good experience for the client. So I don't want to take on stuff that I don't think I'm going to do a great job at. But you are talking to people who are selling you work. And so I think establishing the experience you're looking for on a resume before you start your search is important. Number 4 is, will your teams work directly with these finance resources? In some early stage companies, I am only interacting with the CEO at the beginning. But as a company grows from 5 to 10 to 15 million in revenue, you need to start looping in the teams, because they need to manage budgets. They need, like, you don't want to be the middleman for all information that goes to your CEO. So I would say identify this. Also, because if it's upfront, they're going to be involved, loop them into the interview process. They probably have experience at startups where they've seen finance go horribly wrong or amazingly right. And so they might also have some insights that you're not even thinking of. And they'll know who they feel is a cultural fit, because even though I'm a contractor, I sit in the Slack channels, I join the team meetings, like I'm very much a part of the team, and you should be just as picky as you would about hiring a full-time resource, as they're going to impact a lot with operations, culture, et cetera. Number 5 is related more to a full-time resource, but is there enough work to challenge and sustain a full-time resource? Even if you just raised a big round and you want to bring in your new shiny full-time resource, the right person isn't going to be happy if the role is not meaty enough for them. What happens is if you bring in a CFO and you're not there yet, that CFO is going to spend a lot of time doing tactical finance things, because you're like, well, we're paying for your time when you're here. So they get pushed down into a role that's not really what they signed up for. It's not the person who's going to necessarily be pumped about like growing with your organization. You're probably overpaying because you could get by on fractional. And so you really need to, I'd say that's why, like, I would never go straight to full-time. I'd always do the fractional half step, because that person should also be helping you like scope and understand how much time they're spending. They're going to be diligent about tracking their time because they're a contractor, and that will help you understand, like, is there enough work for someone full-time? And then finally, if you're hiring full-time, do you have the budget for a seasoned expert? Similar to the last one, you might be eager to bring in this like super experienced full-time CFO, but if you don't have the budget for it, like start with that middle manager, and maybe that person will grow into the right person. Or maybe ultimately you'll bring someone in on top of them when you have more margin to play with. If you're bringing in someone where it's more of a stretch role, you do need to keep in mind that like you're also going to need to have the capacity to mentor them and coach them, or work with your fractional CFO to do so. And to me, that's always a win-win-win. When I'm able to help a client hire someone full-time, I win because I feel great that I got my client to a place where they can do so. So to me, if someone graduates Rainbow CFO, that's a win. It's a win for the resource coming on because they're taking a stretch role and they're getting guidance and coaching from an expert who can give them their model templates, who can help them set up the structure and be that mentor to them. And it's ultimately the biggest win for the company, where they have a great resource at a budget they can afford, and they have that resource getting coached, and everyone's happy. So these are the questions I would ask myself. Then what would I ask the people who I'm interviewing? So like anything, you can go and attend a sales pitch and talk about your company and then hear about theirs and say, oh, yay or nay. But when I'm interviewing someone on behalf of a client, I have my laundry list of questions that I'm really firm about getting answers for. So first, we're going to talk about interviewing more of an agency firm, and then we'll talk about interviewing a freelancer or full-time candidate. So first, we talked about this a little bit earlier, confirm experience in your industry. Get specific and make sure they really have worked with clients in your alignment. Finance and accounting, while in many ways is similar across industries, is also really different. Like I couldn't really take on I don't know, like a manufacturing client I have not worked with. Like that would be a stretch for me. I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know comps of like what success even looks like. Like what does gross margin look for a company like that? And so having someone who can look at other financials or flag when things look different than the norm is important. Next, this is the one I'm most adamant about and usually get the most pushback on as well, is I want to talk to the specific team that will be staffed on my account. In a sales process, an agency probably has a sparkly salesperson who you are dying to work with and absolutely love, but unfortunately, you are not going to be working with them on your books every week. Ask to talk to who will be. You'll often get a no. But if you can commit and say, hey, we're going to be signing in the next 2 weeks, so whoever you're staffing is probably the person with bandwidth right now, we would like to talk to them. I think this is really important. Skill sets range, and even aside from skill sets, I think just like personality and culture fit is important here as well. So get that introduction, push for it, say that that's a critical factor in making your decision. And ultimately, like if you push on it enough, they'll make it happen. Next, align on concrete deadlines. So I have a lot of clients who get very frustrated when their financials come in a little late, or they're not getting quick turnarounds from like whatever resource they're working with. And it's a lot easier for me to escalate this for them when there were already SLAs put in place, the books coming by the 15th day of the month, email turnaround times within 24 hours. When this isn't established, I just have a weaker hand in saying there's an issue. So I would say just like ask these questions up front. With that, ask what the issue escalation process is. Who do I go to if I'm not getting a response? Everyone has a boss at a firm. So like push to know who those people are and like what that process looks like. I know that I try to develop relationships with the CEOs or founders of these firms so that I can go straight to them if there's ever a major issue and say, hey, like we need to talk. And they're generally super receptive. Again, no one cares more about their business than the person in charge. So having your path to get to them to make sure issues are resolved is important. Ask about what's included in packages. Accounting firms in particular will give you like a base package, but if let's say you have an audit or if some additional scope comes up, cleanup work, they're probably going to use an hourly rate. And so make sure you know what that is up front. Also, any annual inflation or rate adjustments. These usually happen on a yearly basis if that's the term of the contract. But I have seen firms where 3 months in, they raise the rate on you and you're like, we just spent all this time onboarding. Like, I didn't expect that. So ask what the cadence is. And then we talked about this. Most accounting firms shouldn't have any issue with this, but make sure that they are going to be able to deliver you accrual financials and move you from cash to accrual if that's where you're at. It's very important. And even if you are and let's say an LLC at a certain point and your taxes are filed on a cash basis, that does not preclude you from getting accrual financials to understand your company's performance, which I would still recommend. And then ask for references. It's easy, sounds simple, but do it. I ask for references and I'm always surprised by sometimes you get ones who will be brutally honest, or better yet is a lot of times they'll give you tips for working with that resource or person. They'll say, hey, like this person is rock solid, they'll deliver accuracy, but like you need to be concrete with your instructions and your like operating procedures. And so most of the most successful relationships I've had with accounting firms right out of the gate are because I got tips up front of like, here's how this team works, here's how to work with them. And then I can like take those lessons learned and not waste any time. So that's an accounting firm or an agency. Interviewing a freelancer or a full-time candidate. First, ask for the resume. Obviously, a full-time candidate will provide this, but if you're talking to someone fractional, they might be more focused on their current clients. I would push to see what they did in their full-time life. Like I am advising as a CFO and an expert because I've done it, because I know what a CFO role and finance function looks at a bigger company. I know what it's like to be in the mind of a full-time executive on a product team. All of these things I think are really important. Is it make or break? No, but I would want to know like where have they really been before they became this expert consulting? If billing hourly, this one is huge. And I tell people this all the time, an hourly rate is not normalized. You might say this person has a $200 hourly rate and this person has a $300 hourly rate. But if the person with a $200 hourly rate takes 30 hours to build a model and the person with the $300 hourly rate takes 10, you should understand this. Probe upfront, say, how long is it going to take you to build my model? How long is it going to take you to actualize it each month? Like pull in actuals, run a forecast versus actuals. How long is it going to, what are you expecting? I'm a $10 million business, like let's say e-com plus a little wholesale. Like, what do you think it's going to take? Like, I certainly know what it should take. And I send my clients work plans every Friday to say, here's what's on the slate for you next week. Never billing surprises. It's helpful for me to set expectations, helpful for them to know what they're paying for, but ask this up front. I could charge half my rate and it could take me double the time, but like, it's not normalized. So find a way to just normalize it between who you're talking to. Probe on if they're doing all the work themselves or outsourcing it. Honestly, this one might not be make or break, but if it were my business, I would want to know if my financials were going elsewhere, just to know it's my business, my financials. Like I do all my own modeling work personally, but I know others do outsource some of that. And again, it's not bad. It could be great. It actually might help you get a lower rate on some of the work because of that, but you should know it. It's your numbers and it's your company. And again, same thing, ask for references. Always, I would. So now you found these people and how do you maximize your working relationship with them? These all sound really straightforward, but finance often gets pushed to the side. It's really easy to say, hey, this finance resource came on, solve all my money problems. Like you go over there. And the communication can fall by the wayside when there's, let's say, higher priority revenue conversations going on with marketing or what have you. But all of when I look back on client relationships, the ones where I like really struggled or had to push to get it to be successful was because I wasn't being communicated to a lot. Tell us finance people what you're thinking, what's on your mind. we don't have a crystal ball and we can't solve your problems if we don't know what's happening day to day. So I am a big fan. I don't bill people even for being in their Slacks because I want them to just like shoot me notes. Like I will do a better job if I have more information. And so communication, if nothing else, like make sure your finance team is like in the weeds on all the meetings, joining leadership team meetings. It's important. Create routine goes along with this, but like they will be better integrated if they are attending your marketing meeting, your inventory planning meeting, your operations meeting. Like pull them in and give your rest of your team a direct line to use them. One of my favorite clients is really one of my favorite clients, just because their team talks to me so much. I love it. Like they ask me questions, they tell me what's on their mind. They're like, hey, I have no idea how to think about this. It's awesome. Like I in turn get to feel part of a team, and I feel like I'm not shouldering the entire burden of the company on my shoulders. Everyone is owning it together. Track progress. So do your forecast versus actuals. Make sure if your CFO isn't delivering this to you, that's a miss. If they are not saying, here's what we thought was going to happen versus here's what is, how do you know if your forecasts are even working? To me, it's my favorite tool. I don't even view it as a report card on myself. I just review it as like a way to understand what's changing in the business and what's less predictable and where we might need to temper our assumptions going forward. So it's my favorite process every month. Adding in my notes, looking at the underlying drivers. If I didn't do this process, I just wouldn't have the like milestone to trigger me to dive in the way I should. So it's very important. And like in a year from now, like even if you change your budget over the course of the year, like pull up where you thought you were going to be a year ago and see how close it is. There's going to be some things that are like weirdly spot on. There's going to be some things that are like, wow, that really changed. Like, what did this all mean for us? So how do we think about that going forward? And then finally, own your numbers. Your CFO is there to really own the financials, but at the end of the day, it's your company. The times I get nervous about a client or a potential client is when they say, oh, yeah, no, I'm not a numbers person, like, which is fine, but like, I don't want to be the person who is carrying the entire responsibility on my back. It is your company. At the end of the day, no one ultimately cares as much about your company as you do. And so you need to know the numbers. Your CFO can be there to explain them, to sit with you for hours and walk you through them and tell you what they mean. But you need to still own it and view them as your own, not as finance's problem, because your numbers are your entire company's success at the end of the day, at least as a biased finance person. So these are my 4 like critical, like you will make your relationship so much more successful, even with the best resource in the entire world. If these things aren't happening, they're going to fail, like, guaranteed. So it's a joint relationship. Don't look to them to just solve problems in isolation. And then guidance on staffing up. We've talked about this, I think, a few times on the slides, but just take your time. You don't need to hire a full finance team overnight. Like when clients first start working with me and they have a model, like it's a lot to take in. If they've never had a model and they're not reviewing numbers like this, if they're not being asked questions constantly, I'm peppering people all the time in every meeting with like, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? Like it's a lot to adjust to. So if you then bring on 3 people, first of all, I don't know how you could go from like 0 to 3 and know that there'd be a meaty enough role for them. But furthermore, integrating 3 people and 3 people's outputs into a process is just a lot on you. So I would say like baby steps, start layering on resources, start layering on tools too. Like today we're talking about mostly the resourcing side of it because that's my world, but like it doesn't all have to be solved by people. People need to be plugged into good process. There's a lot of finance automation out there. And I'd say like move slowly, find a resource who can then help you figure out, is it tools you need? Is it just different process? Is it more meetings? Is it less meetings? But yeah, I would say, like I said earlier, like finance is critical. You need it. You need it to actually have a business that functions and lasts and doesn't run out of money, but don't overspend and don't feel rushed. You're really not going to, it's not going to get you in any good place. And then just to wrap up, a few case studies. I thought it'd be interesting to see the different types of businesses that I work with in a few scenarios. These are not exhaustive, but really to give you a sense of like, when does working with a fractional CFO time out? When does it not? So just some high level examples. So one client who I've been working with for quite a while, $45 million in annual revenue. And really the CEO has such a strong financial background that I'm somewhat the CFO, but I'm also, I'd say I'm co-CFO with them. That's why it works, even though they're such a large business. I don't need to be in every external meeting or every internal meeting. He understands the business model. He can translate what I'm telling him. I own the model, of course. I'm giving extremely detailed forecast versus actuals with my notes. And for now, this still works. I think also finding a resource who you trust and integrates in the team and gets the process takes a lot of time. And so as long as we can make this work, we will. There will come a day where they're going to need someone full time. But I would say like my client here, again, this one's just a longer standing one, but one or two others who are at that $50 million mark, it works, but it just depends. Likewise, I've had one client at $12 million. Workload really began to increase. They had a bunch of new wholesale accounts. They were launching apparel, the SKU list is large. They would have like hundreds of SKUs to manage. They wanted margins on all of it. And really the fractional CFO thing was just starting to feel like I wasn't getting them everything they needed. So I flagged that. I helped them with their search and we brought on a finance manager. I stayed on for about 6 months while he was training up. He came from investment banking, so he was like super sharp with modeling, but like actually owning a finance department in a consumer business was brand new to him. And so that was a huge success. I still have a great relationship with the founders. He's thriving. And it was a really nice transition process. And then there really came like a monthly review finance meeting. And like that last one, I was pretty much silent the whole time. And I said, look, I think he's good. If you ever need anything, I'm always here as a friend. But like, I think transition is complete and he is owning this area and like, you don't really need me anymore. So that was awesome. And that's a business like less than a third of the size of that other one, but it really was time for them. And then finally, one of my clients pacing towards $8 million raised a large round of funding. The pain point for the CEO was that I really couldn't join every single meeting in person. They were hungry to really have that like cohesive in-person team, joining everything. And so help them find their full-time resource. And about a year in, the role just wasn't meaty enough. The person I think was bored. I think they were just like on all fronts. Like the CEO was frustrated where there wasn't as they didn't feel like they needed that full-time role. I think everyone did. And so they are once again a Rainbow CFO client. And I'm sure they will go back and we'll help them find someone else again. And I think it was like a very good, I think it was good on all fronts where like the resource who came on understood it, the CEO understood it, but I think it was just a lot of communication between all of us of like what they thought they needed versus what they needed in reality. And so I also think I keep this situation in mind where, it's okay to backtrack sometimes too, if it's the right decision for your business, just because you've committed to a role, if it's no longer serving you, or if it could be restructured, that's okay too. So a few examples of many, but I thought they painted a picture of like different stages of like moving from that part-time to full-time or not yet. So yeah, that's really it. I think overarching thoughts on my end are like, don't rush the process, but don't be afraid to start to inch into some finance support when you feel you need it. Some bookkeeping firms offer packages as light as like $300 or $400 a month. Like you can really start small just to get that extra support and grow as your business grows. But yeah, I love my job. I love talking about this. So if there's questions today, we definitely have time for it. And my contact is up here if you ever want to talk finance as a friend, as a potential client, or if you need recommendations for accounting firms or anything like that, I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Andi, so much. That was super, super helpful. And really appreciate you walking us through kind of how to think through all of this. But yeah, wanted to open up and see if anybody has any questions. Feel free to either put them in the chat or I think the Q&A is up too. In the meantime, I also did have one question. You talked about, when you're thinking about maximizing your relationship with your fractional CFO, the importance of tracking forecasts versus actuals. How do you think about like measuring the performance of that person themselves, just as you would measure like a full-time employee's performance with like a performance review cycle? Do you think about like having something else like that in place?
That's a good question. I would say, so I never go through like a formal performance cycle. I honestly sometimes feel like contractors are almost held more rigorously to that performance review on an ongoing basis. in some ways, just because, and I see that like with some of the other firms we're working with too, with a client, like because it's so flexible, you're not as like committed. I think a lot of times companies feel like it's not like a relationship they're coaching. Like I don't look to my clients to give me feedback or to coach me. Like I show up as the expert where I'm delivering. So I don't need that hand holding. But I'll also say like, I'm constantly asking for feedback. I'm like hungry for it. In every meeting, I'll be like, okay, like, do you have what you need? What do you need? So I also think it's somewhat on the consultant to seek that out. If they're not pushing back and saying like, here's what I need, or here, what do you need? And like, am I delivering to what you want? I would say like founders might be more inclined to like swap you out, and like that it's just like the ability of having contractors, like that's like sort of why people bring someone on a part-time basis. I don't think there's going to be that formal performance review. I think like as if a founder's not happy with a consultant, they'll probably let them know. And as a consultant and an expert, like I want my clients to be happy. So I'm constantly asking for feedback. Like, hey, do you have everything you need? In my work plan every Friday, I'm like, what else do you need? Like, is there anything I'm missing here? So I would say it's a bit more fluid. Like there's not one point of where it happens every time. But in terms of like that forecast versus actuals, it's a good point. Like, I don't know if your CFO is constantly missing, and it's not just because like your business is changing, but because like they're missing things or because they're not like updating it more frequently. Like to me, that would be a flag. Like
Yeah.
sometimes my forecast versus actuals can be wildly off, but if it's because like there was a major change in the business or something happened, or like let's say a major client or customer churned, like that type of stuff, like I don't feel like is because I'm not a good CFO, but there are times where like if your forecast is always missing, like that could be worth diving into.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So we have a question from the audience. So how do you juggle your own time to make sure you have the bandwidth for all of your clients?
That's a good question. And I would say my first year was definitely a learning experience in that. I'm definitely someone who loves to say yes to things. I love when I hear of a cool company and they want to work with me, like I just want to say yes all the time. And so my first year, especially when I was like building this new business, was that. And then I started to realize like, oh wow, not only have I staffed myself to capacity, but all of these companies are growing. Like I started with some companies that started at like less than $1 million revenue, and now they're pacing to 30 this year. And so I've also been overwhelmed at times by like, wow, I'm still with them and they're growing and the work has changed completely. So I would say above all else, my work plan process is like my favorite thing. And I've actually done it since month one, where I send clients every Friday of like, here's what I have on the plate for you. Here's when I'm going to deliver it to you. And here's how long it's going to take. If I didn't do that, I think it's a really helpful way in setting expectations with clients, because also if I say I'm going to send you this next Thursday, it's going to take me this long, like just so you know, let me know if any issues. And they're like, I need it Monday. Like then I reshuffle, I talk to other clients. And so I say like 50% of my job is being a fractional CFO, 25% is being a strong communicator and calendar manager. And then the other 25% is being a therapist to founders, where I'm like the only other person who knows their financials and like can actually like sympathize or be there for them when they're stressed or when they're happy, etc. But yeah, calendar management, like I don't just block my calendar for meetings, I block it for work. I actually manage two calendars, one where people send invites to, and one where then I actually like duplicate the meeting and like name it for the client and color code it and this and that. So I definitely have to be on top of it. There's times where I actually was saying yesterday, like maybe it's the full moon last week, but this is maybe my busiest week of being a fractional CFO in 3.5 years for no good reason. Like every client has just needed a lot. Every client has wanted to spend a lot of time, not for bad things, just like decision-making points. And so sometimes you work late, and then other weeks it's a bit slower, and I like do other like networking or like finance type things. But usually it steadies out. Like if one client needs something one week, then the next one doesn't. The third week of every month is very busy for me because all the financials have closed and I'm actualizing models and meeting with people. But over time, I've just started to get the swing of it. And when I've been working with clients for years as well, like people know and trust me. They know if I say I'm getting something to them on Thursday, it's coming on Thursday. And so I don't tend to get a ton of follow up in the meantime. But it certainly wouldn't be for everyone. It's a lot of coordination and admin work along with the finance work. It's a good question.
Awesome. Any other parting questions before we wrap up? Cool. Well, thank you again, Andi, for joining, especially during your busiest week of the
No,
last 3 years.
planned it.
So
No.
sorry to have, coincided with that, but also exciting that all your clients are doing so well and growing quickly.
Yes.
But thanks again. This has been really, really helpful and informative. And yeah, please to anybody who's watching, please feel free to get in touch with Andi if you have any questions or follow-ups, or me if you have any questions or follow-ups on the settle side. But thanks to everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks,
All
guys.
right.
Bye.
See you later.